Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Hey Amud Aleph 5a of Maseches Kiddushin. We are towards the bottom of the page, 6 lines from the bottom at the 2 dots. The Gemara says Amar Rav Huna. So, as we mentioned numerous times already, the Mishnah taught us that there's 3 ways to be Mekadesh an Isha, to sanctify, to betroth a wife, and that is Kesef, money, shtar, with a document, and Bia, through intercourse. Now the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna said, Chuppah koneh. Chuppah is also koneh. Chuppah, going under a canopy, that also works for Kiddushin. How exactly one would do that isn't clear. It sounds like you would stand under a chuppah and say, Harat Mikudeshesli. Right? We, of course, nowadays do Kiddushin under a chuppah, but we do it with a ring, with Shaveh Kesef, with something of value. But he's saying you don't even need that. Rav Huna says just standing under the chuppah works for Kiddushin. How does he know? Mikal v'chomer. He can learn it from Mikal v'chomer, a fortiori. Uma kesef she'eno ma'achil b'truma. Koneh. He says we've established, the Mishnah teaches us, we learned it from Psukim, from verses, that kesef works, money works for Kiddushin. So if kesef, if money, which doesn't have the ability to give a woman the ability to eat truma, in other words, he's saying that Kiddushin itself, betrothal itself, of a Bas Yisrael, of a girl who's not from a Kohen family, but she's now marrying a Kohen. So once she marries him completely with Nisuin, full marriage, she can now eat truma. But at the point of Kiddushin, she still can't eat truma, which is reserved for Kohanim. So he says, if Kesef, which betroths her, which is Kiddushin, does not, Eino Ma'achil B'truma, just a betrothal does not give her the ability to eat truma if she becomes betrothed to a Kohen, and yet, Koneh, yet it works for Kiddushin. So Chuppah, Shema'acheles B'truma, Chuppah, which is what we know Chuppah works for Nisuin, to complete a marriage. So he says Chuppah, which completes a marriage, which consummates a marriage, if Chuppah works to allow her now to eat Truma, because now she is completely married with Chuppah, Eino din shetikneh, isn't it all the more so that it should work for Kiddushin? If the act of Chuppah, which affects Nisuin, works so much that it gives her the ability to eat truma, she's now considered completely married to the Kohen, while Kesef, Kiddushin, doing Kiddushin through Kesef, does not give her the ability to eat truma. So doesn't it follow, says Rav Huna, that and yet Kesef does give her the ability, money does give her the ability to be betrothed, to have Kiddushin. So if money betroths her, but doesn't allow her to eat truma, so Chuppah, which does allow her to eat truma, all the more so that should work for betrothal. So the Gemara questions the premise. Asks the Gemara, "V'kesef eino machil." Is it true that Kiddushin of kesef, of money, does not allow her to eat truma? V'ha'amar Ula, but Ula said, "Divar Torah arusa bas Yisrael ocheles b'truma." According to the Torah, midoraisa, a arusa, a betrothed woman who's a bas Yisrael, from a Yisrael family, who's now betrothed to a Kohen, can eat truma. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, "V'Kohen ki yikne nefesh, kinyan kaspo." When a Kohen acquires a person, a soul, a kinyan of kasef through a purchase, so that person can eat truma. Now, there in that context, it's talking about a eved, a slave, or a maidservant. That when a Kohen acquires a person as a slave, they now are part of the family. They could eat truma. So a wife is also acquired with money. So therefore, right? Not that she's a maidservant or an eved, but she also is acquired with the same acquisition. So he says, "V'hai kinyan kaspahu." The verse speaks about kinyan kaspo. Someone was acquired through kesef. Someone was acquired through money. So therefore, Midoraisa, we learn from this pasuk that a woman who's betrothed only through Kiddushin of Kesef to a Kohen is now allowed to eat the Kohen's truma. Now, umatam amru eina ocheles. Now, why did the rabbis come and decree that she shouldn't eat truma? It's a decree. We're concerned. Shema yimzigu lakos b'veisavia. Maybe somebody, now that she could eat truma, but she's only betrothed, so she's living at home with her family who are not Yisraelim, and somebody might offer her a glass of truma wine because she's allowed to eat truma. V'tishken l'achil achosel. And she might give some to her brothers and sisters who are not allowed because they're Yisraelim. They can't drink that truma wine. So that's why the rabbi said that while a woman is still betrothed, she may not have truma because she's living at home. She might end up giving it to a family member who can't have it, and she has to wait till she has nisuin and she's living with her husband, the Kohen. Then she's allowed to have truma. But midaraisa, the Gemara is asking. The Gemara is making the point. Midaraisa, she could have truma after kiddushin of kesef. So there's no kal v'chomer. The whole kal v'chomer was if kiddushin with kesef does not allow her to eat truma, and yet it can create kiddushin. So chuppah, which consummates marriage, which does allow her to eat truma, all the more so that should affect kiddushin. So to that the Gemara is saying it's not kal v'chomer because the truth is that according to Torah law, even kiddushin of kesef does allow her to eat truma. So there's nothing stronger about chuppah which will allow us to learn it from kesef. Ella parachachi. So rather, the Gemara says you should ask the following, or this is really what the kal v'chomer should be. Umar kesef she'eino gomer koneh. If kesef, which does not have the ability, money does not have the ability to be gomer, to complete her transition to her husband, yet it could be koneh. It works for kiddushin. So chuppah shegomeres, chuppah which does have the ability to consummate, to complete the marriage, eino din shetiknet. Wouldn't you say all the more so that it should work for the kinyan, the kiddushin? And in the sort of the details of this, Rashi explains that not what we mean by completing a marriage. What is nisuin? What is nisuin more than kiddushin? So Rashi says that once you have nisuin, once you have the marriage, the marriage is now complete. So she's now left her father's rishus, even let's say a naira. Once she's a bogeres, once she's over 12 and a half, she anyways is no longer in her father's domain. But a naira who's 12. So she's still in her father's domain, and when you only have kiddushin, her ma'aseh yadayim, her profits from her work belong to the father, and her father would be yoresh, would inherit anything that she owns. That's at the point of kiddushin. But once you have nisuin, so then she's now married to the husband. Her ma'aseh yadayim doesn't go to the father anymore; it's hers. It goes to her husband in exchange for him feeding her, but. And now her husband would be yoresh, will inherit her. So that things change at nisuin. She's now completely out of the father's rishus with nisuin. So says the Gemara, if kesef, if money does not have the ability to completely remove her from the father's rishus, to affect nisuin, marriage, and yet it has the ability to affect kiddushin, so chuppah, which does have the ability to completely remove her from the father's rishus and affect nisuin, wouldn't you say all the more so that it should have the ability to do a more limited type of transaction or transition, which is kiddushin? Wouldn't you say all the more so that chuppah should work for kiddushin? That's the top of Hayom Abayis, chuppah shegomeres. Chuppah that does have the ability to complete a marriage and move her from the father's domain to the husband's. Eino din shetikne, wouldn't you say all the more so that it has the ability to affect the more limited kiddushin? So the Gemara says, no, you know why you can't learn from kesef? It's true in this area, kesef is more limited, that it can only affect kiddushin, not nisuin. But mala kesef shkein podim bo hekdeshos meiser sheni. We see elsewhere that in other contexts, kesef is more effective than chuppah. For example, like we mentioned last week, this example, kesef, money, has the ability to redeem hektish, something that's been dedicated, sanctified to the Beis HaMikdash. Somebody donates their field. The Beis HaMikdash doesn't need their field. They need their money, so they redeem the field for money. You have to use money, though, for that. Or Meiser Sheni. or if a person doesn't want to bring their Meiser Sheni, their tithe from years 1, 2, 4, or 5 of Shemitah, which you have to bring your produce, your tithed produce to Yerushalayim to consume it. If you don't want to do that, so that's your Meiser Sheni. If you don't want to bring it, you can, or it's so much, so you can redeem it for money and bring the money to Yerushalayim. So, but that's specifically money. And you couldn't use a chuppah for that. The chuppah, right, is not going to really do it to redeem hektish or Meiser Sheni. So we see that kesef has certain abilities that chuppah doesn't. So therefore, the fact that kesef works for Kiddushin, well, there's other areas that kesef works and chuppah doesn't. So we can't make we can't prove from the fact that kesef works for Kiddushin that chuppah should also, because we have situations where we know clearly that only kesef works. There it's explicit in the verse that kesef works. And I don't even know how to imagine a way that chuppah could work. So therefore, you can't assume that just because kesef works for Kiddushin, that chuppah should also work. Says the Gemara, no, bia tochiach. No, bia can refute that, intercourse, because we see that the fact that kesef can be used to redeem hektish or meiser sheni that's not a necessary component to be able to affect Kiddushin. Because bia, intercourse, cannot be used in any way to redeem meiser sheni or hektish, or sanctify things to the temple. It can't use that to redeem, right? Again, it's unimaginable how that would work even. And yet bia, we learned, works for Kiddushin. So the ability to redeem hektish and meiser sheni is not a strength, it's not a component to the ability to be able to affect Kiddushin. You see that from bia. So therefore, the fact that kesef has that doesn't help for kesef apparently. That's not necessary. So again, we should be able to learn from kesef to chuppah that chuppah, if chuppah works to complete a marriage and complete a transition, so surely it should work for Kiddushin, just like kesef does. So to that we respond again, though. We're trying to refute from bia and say bia doesn't have the component of being able to redeem hektish and meiser sheni, and yet it works for Kiddushin. Says the Gemara, well, mala bia shken kona biyavama. But bia may not have that, but it has its own things. Bia works to be kona a yavama. It works to marry a yavama. It's the only thing that works to marry a yavama. So maybe that's why bia works for Kiddushin, because bia has certain advantages, and that's what's giving it a leg up. And kesef, and kesef has a different leg up, which is that it can be used to redeem hektish and meiser sheni, but chuppah has no leg up. Chuppah has nothing special, and maybe you couldn't learn chuppah from kesef. But the Gemara says, kesef yochiach. What we could really say back is the fact that yavama, that bia works for yavama, maybe that's not special. Maybe that's not a necessary component for Kiddushin, because kesef doesn't work for yavama. You can't use kesef to marry a yavama, and yet you could use kesef for Kiddushin. So we see the ability to marry a yavama is not a necessary component for Kiddushin, because look at kesef, it doesn't have that. So what we end up with is that we know that kesef works for Kiddushin. We know that bia works for Kiddushin. That was the Gemaras that we learned previously. We learned that from Psukim. Kesef has a certain advantage that we see that it's special. It's the only thing that could be used to redeem hektish and meiser sheni. Bia has certain advantages. It can't be used to redeem hektish and meiser sheni, but it could be used to marry yavama. So it has that advantage. But kesef doesn't have that. So are these things necessary components or not to be able to affect Kiddushin, which is going to determine whether we can learn chuppah from kesef or from bia. So the Gemara now says as follows. It says, v'chazar adin, sort of the logic rotates around itself. Lo rizeh k'rizeh. This one doesn't have the special advantage that this one has, meaning, let's say, bia doesn't have what kesef has. Kesef can be used to redeem hektish and meiser sheni. Bia can't. V'lo rizeh k'rizeh. But this one doesn't have the advantage of that one. That bia could be used to marry a yavama, but kesef can't. But so what do? what we end up with is, let's look at what they do have in common. What do kesef and bia have in common? Hatzad hashava shebohen, the common denominator between them is shekonin ba'alma v'konin kan. The common denominator is that they can be used to be koneh in other situations. Kesef could be used, in many situations to buy things, but also, like we're talking about here, to redeem hektish and meiser sheni. Bia could be used to be koneh, to acquire a wife in the situation of yibum. V'konin kanin, and they work over here. So based on that, that's what I see is the necessary common denominator. It has to be able to be koneh in other situations, then it could be koneh here. So afani avi chuppah. So let me bring in chuppah, a canopy. Shekoneh ba'alma, v'koneh kan. And I'll say, because it's koneh ba'alma, there's another situation where it's koneh, where it works to acquire, which is when a woman is already in Kiddushin. Chuppah works to acquire her completely now. So we see that it works ba'alma, it works in a different situation. So I should say that here also, chuppah works to acquire already at the step of Kiddushin. That's the common denominator of kesef and bia. They both work in general, in other situations to be koneh, and they work over here. So chuppah, which also works to acquire a wife when you're consummating the marriage, when you're completing the marriage, so it should work as well for the step of Kiddushin. So the Gemara says there's a problem with that, because ma l'tzad hashava shebohen sheking hana asang meruba. It's true that kesef and bia, money and intercourse, both have a common denominator, that they are koneh in other situations, but they have a different common denominator as well, which is that they have hana, they have a pleasure, they have a benefit to them. Kesef has a monetary benefit, bia has a pleasurable benefit, but chuppah doesn't, you might enjoy standing under a chuppah, but it doesn't really have any tangible benefit. So perhaps we could not learn from kesef and bia together. They have a common denominator that they can acquire in other situations, but they also have a common denominator that they have a pleasure or benefit, and that is not true by chuppah. So maybe I can't learn chuppah from them. Says the Gemara, shtar yochiach. Oh, but I have a third thing that I know works, which is shtar, a document. That works for Kiddushin, and it doesn't have any pleasure or tangible benefit. So now I have a three-pronged approach, because now I have shtar showing me that you don't need, that's not one of the common denominators that's important here, because it doesn't have any special pleasure or tangible benefit, and yet it works for Kiddushin. So to that the Gemara says, well, shtar, maybe you can't prove anything, because mal shtar sheking motzi b'vas Yisrael. A shtar works to divorce. A shtar works to divorce. So it has its own unique power of transitioning and transactions. So maybe that's why it works here. But can you prove from the fact that shtar works, despite not having any hana, any benefit, that chuppah should also work? Perhaps not, because shtar has a special thing. It works to even get divorced. So to that, the Gemara says, kesef ubia yochichu. But we can use kesef and bia to refute that, because we see that kesef and bia work for Kiddushin, even though they can't work for divorce. And so we see that that's not an important component. So again, the chazar adin. So now the logic rotates on itself. Lo rizeh k'rizeh. The strengths of kesef and bia aren't true by shtar, because they have hana, they have benefit, but shtar doesn't. V'lo rizeh k'rizeh. And the benefits, the strength sort of the shtar is not true by kesef and bia, because a shtar could be used for divorce and kesef and bia can't. But obviously those components are not important. What is important? The common denominator of all three, kesef, shtar, and bia, is shekonin ba'alma, that they could be used to acquire in other situations. V'konin kan, and they could use to acquire a wife here. Afani avi chuppah shekona ba'alma v'kona kan. So I'll bring chuppah as well, which can be koneh in other situations, because it can complete a marriage, and I'll say that it also should be able to be koneh to acquire in the initial stage of marriage at the time of Kiddushin. Says the Gemara, but still, there's something about kesef, shtar, and bia which doesn't exist by chuppah, and you should not be able to learn from them to chuppah, because because there's a different common denominator between kesef, shtar, and bia, which is shekein yeshnan bal karcha. They all can function against the woman's will. Kesef, in the case of a maidservant, it's not her choice. Let me just double check. I think that's what we're talking about here. By kesef, a maidservant, a young girl, could be sold against her will. It's her father's choice. A shtar works for a get, midoraisa, get divorced against a woman's will. Again, nowadays we don't do that, but midoraisa it works. And bia, by yavama, it's not up to yavama. So these three types of transactions, we see that they have a certain higher level of effectiveness because they're situations where they work even against a woman's will. But chuppah, we never find that it can work against a woman's will. So to that, Rav Huna responds. Rav Huna is the one who's trying to learn chuppah from these ones. For Rav Huna will respond and say, "Kesef mia beishus lo ashkecham bal karcha." Very good that you find that kesef works against a girl's will when she's being sold as a maidservant, but we never find that it works against her will for marriage. So you need to show me, Rav Huna saying that it can work against her will even in the context of marriage, to show that these three things have super strength that you couldn't learn from chuppah to them, that it's a common denominator with regards to marriage. Then I would agree you can't learn from kesef, shtar, and bia to chuppah. But since it's not a common denominator with regards to marriage, because we don't find with regards to marriage that a girl can be forced to get married, so therefore it's not a common denominator, and you're able to learn chuppah from those three. Okay, so that's Rav Huna. Says the Gemara, Omar Rava. Rava says, Shtei tshuvos b'davar. Rava says, I have two responses to you, Rav Huna. Chada, first of all, d'shalosh tanan, v'dalad lo tanan. First of all, you're telling me that chuppah works for Kiddushin. Well, the Mishnah says there's 3 ways to do Kiddushin. It doesn't say 4, it says 3. So how could it be that you're introducing a 4th? The Mishnah clearly doesn't hold like you. That's my first response, says Rava. Ve'od, and furthermore, Klum chuppah gomeres ela al yedei Kiddushin. How is chuppah, you're trying to learn chuppah from the other ones, and you're saying that chuppah has the ability to be koneh, to acquire, because it can complete a marriage. Well, when can it complete a marriage? Only if there was previously a Kiddushin. So, v'chi gamrinan chuppah shelo yedei Kiddushin me chuppah shal yedei Kiddushin? Are you going to learn that a chuppah without a Kiddushin works because a chuppah with a Kiddushin works? The chuppah that we know works only works after a Kiddushin. So how are you going to... It already has this basis, so to speak, to stand on. So we don't see that it's like a strong type of kinyan. We only see that it works after an existing Kiddushin. So how could you learn that a chuppah should be able to work without a Kiddushin from the fact that it works after an already existing Kiddushin? That's Rava's second question. So Amar le Abaye, so Abaye says back, I can answer both those questions. Hadikamarta gimel tanan v'dalad lo tanan. Your question that the Mishnah said 3 and not 4, so how can you say that there's a 4th? I'll tell you. Tana, the Tana of the Mishnah, the sage of the Mishnah, milsa diksiva behedya katani, milsa de lo ksiva behedya lo katani. He only listed in the Mishnah the things that are written explicitly in the Torah, or learned out explicitly in the Torah, but not through logical deductions like this. Things that are not listed, it didn't mention in the Mishnah. That's the categories that it was listing, but indeed there is a 4th, and it's chuppah. That's why I can answer. Udika amarta, and that which you said, Klum chuppah gomeres ela al yedei Kiddushin, you said, how can you learn from the fact that chuppah completes a marriage that it should also be able to initiate a marriage with Kiddushin? the whole strength of the chuppah to be able to complete a Kiddushin is only a marriage is only because there was already an existing Kiddushin. So to that, Abaye says, Rav Huna nami hachikamer. I'll tell you what Rav Huna meant. Rav Huna meant as follows. Uma kesef she'eno gomer achar kesef. Kona, if kesef, which cannot even complete a marriage after an initial Kiddushin of kesef, but yet it could make that initial Kiddushin, chuppah shegomeres achar kesef, a chuppah which could complete a marriage after an initial Kiddushin, eno din shetikneh. Isn't it logical? We see it's stronger than kesef, and it should be able to make the initial acquisition. So we're not just learning from the original limud. The original attempt to learn was to say, if kesef cannot complete a marriage and cannot complete the transition out of the father's household into the husband's domain, if kesef cannot do that, it can only do an initial kiddushin, which doesn't completely remove her to a different domain. And yet it could do that initial Kiddushin. So chuppah, which could complete that transition, can complete a marriage, all the more so it should make the initial step. The Gemara's question, Rava's question is, well, we don't really know that chuppah can make that full transition, because that only works once there's an initial Kiddushin. So we don't really see a strength of chuppah over kesef, necessarily. Because all we see is that chuppah is good once you already have a Kiddushin. But who says that chuppah is strong on its own? So Abaye is saying, we do see that chuppah is better than kesef, because kesef, even if you have an initial kiddushin of kesef, still can't be used to complete the marriage, to consummate the marriage, and yet chuppah can. So therefore it follows that we see that chuppah is better than kesef. And so if kesef can be used to initiate the marriage with the initial kiddushin, all the more so that chuppah should work for that as well. The Gemara continues, it says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. We have a brisa. Ketzad v'kesef. How does one do kiddushin with kesef? Nasan la kesef, o shava kesef. If he gives her money, or something that of the value of money, that has monetary value, shava kesef. The Amar lan, he says to her, Hareat mekudeshesli. You are betrothed to me, sanctified to me. Hareat meuresesli, from the language of Arusa. That's the language the Torah uses. That you are my arusa, you are betrothed to me, or he says Hareat li le'insu, you should be my wife. Harezu mikudeshes. That works for kiddushin. So he gives her the kiddushin, and he says the words. He has a choice: Hareat mikudeshes, Hareat meureses. You'll be my wife. Any of those. Aval hi shenasna ve'amra. If she gives him the money and she says Hareini mikudeshes lach, I will be sanctified to you. Or she says, Hareini mureses lach, I will be betrothed to you. Or she says, Hareini lach la'insu, I will be a wife to you. Eina mikudeshes. That does not work for kiddushin. So if he gives and he says it works, the brisa says. If she gives and she says it doesn't work. That's the brisa. Maskif lo Rav Papa. Rav Papa had a question on this. The problem is that we have opposing, contradictory inferences here. Taima de nasanhu va'amarhu. It sounds like the reason why the kiddushin works is because you need two things. That he gave the money and he said the words. Ha nasanhu, but if he gave the money v'amrahi and she said the words, eina mekudeshes. It sounds like the kiddushin won't work. You need both him to give and him to say the words. But ema seifa, but then let's examine the second cause, the second half of the brisa. It says, Aval hi shenasna lo v'amrahi la v'kiddushin. If she gives the money and she says it, it's not kiddushin. And it sounds like Taima de nasnahi v'amrahi. The reason it's not kiddushin is because she both gave the money and said the words. Ha nasanhu, but if he had given the money v'amrahi, but she had said the words, habu kiddushin. It sounds like that would be kiddushin. It sounds like, right? It says if she gave the money and she said the words, it's not kiddushin. You can infer, but if he gave the money and she said the words, it would be kiddushin. So what's the story? If he gives the money and she says the words, is it kiddushin or not? Says the Gemara, Reisha davka, Seifa kedin aspa. Now the Reisha was being specific, the first half was being specific. He has to both give the money and say the words. The Seifa, the second half, was just on kedin aspa. It said it freely, but it didn't really mean to allow for such an inference. Ask the Gemara, Vitani Seifa Milsa de Sastra la Reisha. But would the Seifa, would a Tana do that and say something in the Seifa, in the second half, that contradicts the first half, even by inference? We wouldn't do that. That's too sloppy. Elahachi kamar. So rather, what was the Tana saying? What was the Brisa saying? It was saying as follows. Nasanhu ve'amar hu. If he gives the money and he says the words, Pshita d'habu kiddushin. That's obvious that that's kiddushin, it works. Nasanhu ve'amrahi. But what if what we want to infer is that if he gives the money and she says the words, that's kimisha nasnahi ve'amrahi. It's as if she gave the money and said the words. So this answer is telling us to read the Brisa as follows. If he gives the money and says the words, obviously it's kiddushin. Now why am I telling you that? Because I want you to infer, but if he gives the money and she says the words, it's not kiddushin. And now read on the Brisa that is just like the second half of the Brisa, if she gives the money and she says the words, which it's not kiddushin. That's how it works. It wants us to infer from the Reisha, and then it's saying, infer from the first half, that if he gives the money and she says the words, it's no good. And what the second half is doing is it's saying that is exactly like this. That's just like if she did both, which wouldn't work. That's the Gemara's first answer. The Baisem, and if you want, you can say a different explanation for the Brisa. As follows. Nasanghu v'amarhu mikudeshes. The Reisha says if he gives the money and he says the words, kiddushin. Obviously, that works. Nasnahi v'amrahi eina mikudeshes. If she gave the money and she said the words, she's not mikudeshes. It doesn't work. That's the Reisha and the Seifa. That's the two halves. Now, what about the in-between case? Our inference. If he gave the money and she said the words, then what? Nasanghu v'amrahi. If he gave the money and she said the words, Sveikahi, it's a suffix, it's an uncertainty, it's a doubt. We don't know what the ding is. That's what the Brisa is telling you. That would be an uncertainty. V'chayshinan midrabanan, and we would have to be choshesh. We would have to be concerned midrabanan. We would have to be concerned. The rabbis are telling us that we would have to be concerned for a kiddushin that follows. Meaning, if they did kiddushin in this manner, if the husband gave the money and the wife said the words, so are they married or not? Did that work or not? Are they betrothed? It's a suffix. What's the practical application of that suffix, of that uncertainty? What if another man now comes and gives her kiddushin? Are they married? Well, it depended if the first ones were married. If the first ones were married, the second man is not married to her. If the first one was not married, if it didn't work, then now she's married to the second guy. So the nafkamina, the practical application, would be that because we're uncertain, we would require that second man to give her a get. Actually, we would require both men to give her a get because we're not sure if the first one was married or not, and if they were, we want him to give a get because they can't, in order for it to be able to go and marry someone else. And maybe the second kiddushin was good. If the first one wasn't good, then the second one was good. And if the second one was good, the first one wasn't good, the second one was good, and therefore she certainly needs a get from the second one, and she should get a get from the first guy also because we don't know what her status is, and that way if she gets a get, then she'll be free now to marry whoever she wants. Okay, we will stop there. Thanks for joining. See you next time.